This is Join Us in France, episode 187. Bonjour, I'm Annie, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France, its many quirks, its history, its language, and of course, destinations in France you will want to learn about because, hopefully, you'll be visiting soon. In today's episode, Elyse and I give you an overview of Paris museums. Big museums, small museums, museums that present great temporary exhibits, museums that appeal to locals, museums famous for their permanent gorgeous collections, odd little museums around a specific topic, museums that are good for visitors who bring children, and museums that are wonderful for people who they don't really love museums. And yes, there are some of those in Paris as well. If you're preparing your first visit to Paris, this episode is important to you because that's how you learn what's out there on the wonderful Paris museum scene. We don't list all Paris museums, there are too many, but we do our best to give you a comprehensive review of all our wonderful Paris museums. And if you don't understand some of the names of the museums that we mentioned, because, I say them in actual French, I have no idea how someone who doesn't know any French would butcher the name, sorry. But look at the show notes, either on your podcasting app or go to joinusinfrance.com/187, the numbers 187, 187, where it is all spelled out for you. Join Us in France is brought to you by Patreon supporters and Addicted to France, the small group tour company for people who want to enjoy France to the fullest with zero stress. Check out our upcoming tours on addictedtofrance.com. Hello, Elyse.
Hi, Annie.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Okay, I've been seeing you for an hour because we've been talking about this overview of Paris Museum for an hour already. It's such a mess. There's so many museums in Paris.
There are so many. It may be, I am not sure, it may be that Paris is the city in the world with the most museums.
Right. So this episode, we want to give you an overview of Paris museums. But you know what? There's so many, we will probably miss lots of them.
And we're going to have our mouths tired by the time we get done with this particular podcast.
Yeah, and there are... Okay, French people like to complicate things. So we have national museums, and then we have municipal museums, and then we have private museums. But that doesn't mean anything to you as a visitor because it's the same. I mean, you could think, okay, if it's a national museum, it's a bigger museum than if it's not.
Right.
But that's not true because in Paris, there are national museums where nobody ever goes, and there's private museums where there's lots of attendance.
Right.
So don't base, don't worry about that too much. And organizing an overview of Paris museums is kind of difficult because it's hard to know how do we organize it. Like, do we do it by geography? Right. What's next to what? Or do we do it by type
Subject.
of interest, right? Topic matter? Or do we do it by importance? So the important museums and the not important museums, well, that doesn't make any sense because obviously if you're interested in, tapestries,
right.
There are tiny little museums in Paris that you will love. Right. So it's kind of hard to organize all of this. And the other thing I want to tell you is that we've talked about many of these museums already on specific episodes. And in that case, we'll just tell you that was episode 21. And, if you want to know more, go to that one.
And I think you were going to mention that we're going to talk about things that are long, in terms of a list, much, much more than just what's on the museum pass.
Right. Several of these are on the museum pass. Several are not.
Right.
That'll be up to you.
The most famous ones usually are.
Yeah.
Right.
So it'll be up to you to decide. We like the museum pass because it gives you a lot of freedom when you're in Paris. But it's great if you are a person who's likely to go into museums.
Right.
If you're not into museums, then probably you're not listening to this episode anyway, right?
But literally, there is really practically a museum for everyone.
Yes.
In every topic imaginable.
Right. So what we're going to try and do is tell you what's there and briefly why you should go.
Right.
All right. Shall we start with the top of our list?
Sure.
So the Orangerie Museum, that one we're going to skip it because it's episode one.
Skip it.
That's right, because we talked about it in episode 136 where you went into great detail about what's there and all of that. But what I want to tell you is that it's close to the Louvre.
Right.
Jardin des Tuileries.
It's at the end of the Jardin des Tuileries.
Right, it's inside of it. It's close to the Place de la Concorde, close to the Champs-Élysées. This is something that's in the middle of a lot of things to see. So this is a good one. Like if you're walking around the Jardin des Tuileries and it starts raining, well,
you can go in.
Yeah.
Maybe we should just say that we're going to start with things that are connected to fine arts, just so that people.
Okay.
Yes. Just so that we.
That's
really,
right. That's right. We want to do fine arts,
we'll do fine
and
arts.
Sculpture and that type of thing.
We'll sort of
and then we'll
blur our way out.
Correct.
And of course, the Orangerie is a national museum. Most of the national museums, maybe some of the municipal ones too. I'm not even sure. But is every museum closed one day a week? That's my question.
I believe so.
Okay.
They had talked about the Louvre not closing.
Right, because
But
there are so many
that's
people coming.
Either not happened.
I think they have budget problems with getting enough people to be guards and man the stations.
I heard an announcement, but I know it's not implemented yet.
Right.
Maybe it's just supposed to be implemented later.
I'm not sure. I think this is a wish list that they have. I think that's what it is, because in fact it's the opposite. Usually the very big museums like the Louvre and Orsay, because they have some budget problems, every time they close certain rooms. So not everything is always completely open. And then, the idea that they're open 7 days a week, I think it's really part of their Santa Claus wish list at this point.
Yeah, it might be. It might be.
But just a suggestion that to whoever is in Paris and for whatever museum, the suggestion is check out to see which day is the day of closing.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
You must do that.
Because they do change.
Yes.
The Louvre.
Le Louvre.
Oh, well.
Biggie. Everybody knows about the Louvre.
Obviously, right.
We did an episode. It was episode 21. It's a fantastic museum for people who like museum. It's one of those that it's so big where you really need to have a plan.
Yeah.
So what are you going to see at the Louvre? Decide. And then you'll have a great time. If you just go and wander around, you'll get tired and cranky and happy.
And
it's really big.
And it is the museum in the sense that it has everything from the most ancient art, like in Babylonia and Egypt, up through 20th century.
Yeah, they have a lot of
everything.
stuff. They have classes. They have all sorts. They have workshops.
They have
all sorts of things. So just
seminars.
If you want to go to the Louvre, plan that and listen to episode 21.
And lots of cafes. It's actually become a user-friendly place.
Yeah, it's a little bit better than it used to be. The Orsay Museum, we did that on episode 15.
Right.
It's the most popular museum for visitors from North America.
Right.
It's fabulous. It's not too big. It's very approachable art. I would say
it is art that is largely impressionist and post-impressionist.
Right.
It's the museum that covers mid-19th century through early 20th century art. Sculpture, furniture, paintings, of course.
Yeah. Then we have the Rodin Museum, which is one that I particularly enjoy because I like Rodin's sculpture.
Yes.
I like the fact that Rodin was somebody who worked a lot. He just produced and produced and produced. He didn't think of himself as a genius to begin with. He just got good at it. And people like that inspire me.
He really, yes, you're absolutely right. He considered himself to be a craftsman.
Right.
And he did indeed work up until the very end of his life.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's lovely about the museum is that you have major big pieces outside in the gorgeous, gorgeous gardens.
Right.
And then you have smaller pieces and even some watercolors and drawings on the inside of the beautiful building that has recently been renovated.
Right. And that we talked about that at length in episode 102.
And it is a lovely spot.
It's a lovely spot. The Cluny Museum, or the National Museum of Medieval Art, I think.
And culture.
And culture.
Yes.
It's lovely. I love that place. I didn't think I would ever love it. If you listen to episode...
I got you to like it.
Yes. If you listen to episode 8... which I did recently. That was one of the early ones. I had never been, and I was like, oh, I'm not sure I want to go there. And I've been there several times since, and I love the place. It's gorgeous.
It's gorgeous.
Unfortunately, as we release this episode, we're recording early March 2018. It is closed part of the time until late spring 2018, they say. I think they said on their website that they hope to... actually, no, I think that one they said middle of July, that they hope to reopen completely.
And the reason why is they're changing the entranceway.
Yeah.
They are, because it's a museum that was originally specifically about medieval art, furniture, everything actually from the Middle Ages. But since recent discoveries of Roman things have added another element to the museum, I think the old way of going in just didn't work anymore. It was congested and everything. So apparently what they're doing is they're reorienting the way you go into and through the museum.
Yeah. So they're changing that, and their website isn't super helpful. They have this graphic there that shows that the Cluny Museum is eclipsing itself.
Yeah.
And so they have this graphic that shows, more or less moon, but they don't tell you. So they do tell you that it's going to be open some of the time. There's some weeks where it's going to be completely closed, some weeks where it'll be some things will be open for a few hours. Anyway, it's a mess. So if you write there,
because it's right off of Boulevard Saint-Michel in the Latin Quarter.
Right. If you happen to be in the Latin Quarter and you want to go see if it's open when you walk by, you could do that. But maybe if you're not visiting until, if you're visiting right away, that might be one that you'll unfortunately
It also
need
has
to
a
skip.
teeny little garden park that's very sweet to sit in if you have to take a pause.
And that one, you don't have to have a ticket to get to the park. Yeah,
no, you don't.
It's a medieval garden.
It's a medieval garden.
Right. But I'm not sure if they're not renovating that too. Could be.
Maybe.
We don't know.
Okay.
Then the next one we're going to talk about is, and of course the Cluny Museum, the big attraction there is the Lady and the Unicorn tapestry.
Unicorn tapestry.
And also the big giant heads
off of Notre Dame.
off of Notre Dame. They're kind of interesting to see. But it's the Lady and the Unicorn is the big attraction there. Pompidou Center.
My favorite museum.
This is your favorite? Well, not my favorite, but it's a fine museum. Nothing wrong with it.
Very big.
Very big. That one would take you a long time if you wanted to really do it justice. We did an episode about that. That was episode 42.
And one of the things that is really interesting about it, aside from the neighborhood it's in, which is a kind of fun neighborhood to walk through, it's one of the oldest neighborhoods, has this huge esplanade out front, is that it is a museum that's very famous for its enormous, enormous, enormous collection of 20th century art now going into the 21st century.
Yeah.
But it also has a section on architecture, a section on photography, a section on design, and it has some activities for children and a great bookshop.
Yeah.
And you can enter into the lobby and do the shopping without having to pay a ticket to see the exhibits.
Right.
So there's kind of a little bit for everybody.
Yes. Oh, it's lovely. And it was really designed as a place. The idea, Pompidou wanted to bring people back into museums.
Right.
Pompidou was a French president.
Who collected modern art.
Yes, he loved modern art. And he was surrounded by people who made faces when talking about modern art.
Right.
Which is,
like some people I know.
Yeah. It happens. And so he loved that stuff. And his whole life, even before he became the president, he had wanted to do something about bringing modern art more to the masses.
Right.
And when they commissioned the building, they said they wanted something that would, in French we would say interpeller, that would bring up questions, that would make people question, what the heck is that?
Right.
And that's why they had this idea of bringing the
It's an exoskeleton.
Right, it's an exoskeleton, and it also has like tubes of different colors where
Each tube, each color represents a different function.
Right, different functions. So it's going to be the gas is one
Heating,
thing,
the water.
yeah, the water, all that. So, and really, when you look at it, it's not like it's inviting to some people because it brings up like, what is this?
Yes, and it's very colorful.
Right.
Visually, physically.
Right.
I mean, when you see the center of Paris, even from far away, you can spot it because of that. It's kind of like a giant toy.
Exactly.
Really.
And he wanted it to attract all people from all walks of life, even people who had no art education or just, regular workers would go look at that and go, well,
It's
nice
weird,
cool.
right?
Yeah,
It's
weird.
And one of the things that's interesting is that it has a huge, huge national library that is open to the public, and the library is used enormously. I think that's one of the reasons I like the place so much. It's because it's really not snobbish at all.
Yeah, no.
It really isn't.
That was, yes, it was designed as the anti-Louvre.
Yes.
They didn't want it to be like the Louvre at all.
Right.
And they managed. I mean, that's what they did. Okay, let's move on to Musée Mayol.
The Musée Mayol, it's one of my favorite small museums. It was closed for about a year to renovate the inside. It was a private mansion. It's in the 7th. It's not very far from Rue de Rennes, where there's a lot of chic shopping and things like that. It's not too far from the Saint-Germain area. And it is, Mayol was a sculptor in the 19th century. But the museum has become a place of very, very, very good temporary exhibits.
Aha.
So it has a small private collection of Mayol's sculptures, which are mostly in bronze. And in fact, that's one of the reasons they closed, because they wanted to put back a section that was devoted to him. And it is a place that has excellent small exhibits of various kinds of things. Just as an example, just mention quickly two. There was an exhibit of Etruscan art that I saw maybe two and a half years ago. That was beautiful. It was art that the Etruscans, we're talking 2,000 years old.
Right.
But it was small objects. There were things in bronze. There were things in glass. There were sculptures. It was lovely. And then at another moment, I went back to the same museum, and they had an exhibit of artists who work in glass, which included ancient things, because they had a part that was historical. So you see the first glass made by Egyptians and Romans and stuff like that, which was, these are rare pieces. But also it had a lot of really fun, strange pieces done by contemporary glass artists.
Oh.
So it tends to be, it's the fine arts, I guess we could say. It's still in the realm of fine arts. But a lot of it is with objects and interesting things that you would not see elsewhere.
Right. And so this is probably the type of museum that really appeals to locals, because since the exhibit changes and it's not full of tourists all the time, I would bet that the art lovers in Paris love this place.
And every once in a while, they have an exhibit that gets some really good press. And so then all of a sudden you see there's a bit of a line outside. I'd say that in size, it's maybe in the same category as Rodin, maybe a little smaller, but it's a great little treasure.
So an hour
exactly,
kind of visit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
With a little cafe.
Oh, nice. The next one on our list is the Musée du Luxembourg, which we mentioned recently. Right, that was in episode 184, so we're just going to go forward with that one.
And just to mention that it is interestingly considered to be private. I don't know how that works, since it's part of the Senate and all of that, but it's a museum that has only temporary exhibits. And so there's no permanent collection there of any kind. And it has big names. Like there was once, a few years ago, an exhibit of painting by Modigliani, who's a very famous early 20th century artist. It has a lot of stuff that's either impressionist, post-impressionist, sometimes private collectors that give their work to them. So it's a good place to check out to see what the current temporary exhibit is.
Again, probably appeals to locals.
And it appeals a lot to locals, but it also does get a lot of tourists, depending upon what the exhibit is. And because it is in the right across the street from the chicest part of the 6th of the Saint-Germain area, and it is literally in the park of the Luxembourg Gardens.
Right, it's right next
so lots
to
of people like to go there.
Right next to the Senate. It would be a good place to duck into if the weather is foul.
And check out sometimes the museums, sometimes the exhibits are really, really good.
Mm-hmm. Very good. All right. The Centre Vuitton of Contemporary Art.
Yes. Now, this is, I was there last year. It is out in the boonies. It's in the Bois de Boulogne. It's in the 16th. It's at the extreme western edge of the city. You can get there by metro and then take a walk. There are some buses, or if you have a car, you can get there. There's lots of parking around. It's an incredible example of contemporary architecture. It is just
the museum itself.
Just the museum itself. Yeah. It's unbelievable. I really was impressed by it.
When you first look at it, you go, "Oh, that's a Guggenheim."
Yeah,
it's kind of that kind of building.
It's kind of that kind of building, and then it is was of course paid for by. Mr. Arnaud, I can never...
By my sister's bag habit.
I can't remember which one is Arnaud, which one is Pinot. Excuse me. I mean, the two billionaires that own things like that, and it is filled with really, really interesting contemporary art.
And that's also temporary exhibits, right?
There's a small part that is a permanent exhibit,
right. And then,
but largely it is. Temporary exhibits, and this one is headliners. This is the biggies. This is when you get a major collection or a major artist. They are shown there. So it's a little bit of a trek outside of city center. It's a great day excursion because you get to do the park a little bit at the same time, and the museum is just incredible to see.
Yeah, probably great museum for people to go if they've been to Paris several times, and this is something that they haven't explored before.
Or if they're really, if you are someone who's really interested in 20th century art and you do Pompidou, do this one too.
Okay.
That's a really great combo.
It's a good combo.
Yeah, it's a really good combo.
Very good. Mm-hmm. All right, then the Delacroix Museum.
Okay, this is my little baby bijou, as they would say, This is a teeny little museum. It was the last house that Delacroix lived in.
Delacroix was a painter.
Delacroix, very, very, very famous and very important painter of the 19th century, Eugène Delacroix. And I'm not really sure why he lived in this house because it's not very big. But at the end of his life, he lived in this house, which is right off of Boulevard Saint-Germain on a charming little mini square. Mm-hmm. And it has a lovely garden. And he used a part of the house as a painting studio. And so it has a permanent exhibit of some of his smaller works.
Right, because he was famous for gigantic
for very big
art.
Things. Some from drawing.
Monumental pieces.
Some pieces that he collected also, like some other famous artists. He also collected a little bit of work by other artists.
Yeah.
But it gives you a feel... one of the things I like about little museums like that, like other places where the artist lived and worked, is that it gives you a feel for the person. And you get an idea of, they have a couple of the easels up and the big space that he used, which has these gorgeous, huge
big windows.
And there's this lovely little garden in the background, so you can see how he would sit and think about things when he was working. And if you have a ticket for the Louvre, you can use that same ticket to go to this little museum. And it's little, and it's just in this beautiful little part of Paris. So it's you can do it in even 45 minutes, but it's a twinned ticket with the Louvre.
Oh, okay.
So it's really kind of
small museums like that, I tend to think are good for people who are visiting Paris with children because they're small.
Right.
You can walk through, and if the kids get bored...
I guess so. I don't know if this would really be of interest to most children, but of course they can always go out into the little garden. It's just charming, and it's and then I should mention that for those people who will be in Paris in the next 4 or 5 months, there is a major retrospective of Delacroix's painting that is opening at the Louvre. So it's a chance, if you do that, to go and see where and how he worked at the same time, because he's a major painter.
Right. So again, the Louvre have a plan. If your plan is to see Delacroix stuff, wonderful. You're going to get that retrospective and that little museum. So
and it's really just a charming little place, you know, cute, tiny little thing.
Oh. La Fondation Cartier.
Fondation Cartier. Here's a perfect example of like the Vuitton of a really interesting private museum space created by the Cartier Foundation.
Yeah.
And
they have museums in a lot of places.
I don't know how many places they have them.
They have one in Sitges in Spain. Yeah.
Okay.
I think.
It's in the area that's not too far from Montparnasse, on the Boulevard Raspail, I believe, and it is devoted to American contemporary art.
Oh, very nice.
So I've been there twice, and both times it was to see work by an artist whose work I may have seen a teeny little bit, but didn't get a chance to see too much of, because there are very few spaces here, that is in France, devoted specifically to American art.
That's true.
Photography, painting, it doesn't matter. It's not a particular medium.
But it has to be American art.
It's specifically American art and contemporary art. And it's a kind of interesting place to go.
André Jacquemart Museum.
Like the Mayol. These are my two. This one is probably getting to be more well-known. Again, like the Mayol Museum, only that this one, of course, is in the 8th arrondissement. It's not that far from the end of the Champs-Élysées after the Arc de Triomphe. Depends on if you're a good walker or not. Otherwise, you need to take a metro and hoof it a teeny little bit.
Yeah.
It's a private museum that was a magnificent mansion that was built in the 19th century, absolutely stunning, with this double staircase, and all the furniture is in it, and it has this incredible garden in the back. So as a place to just visit to see how the rich lived in the 19th century, it's already one thing. And it has gorgeous, small, temporary exhibits, mostly painting. I've seen several exhibits there. This is one, though, where there is a line, because the exhibits are so important. For the last one I went to see there was an exhibit of work by Van Dyck. And of course, there's a lot of portraits. He did many, many portraits and things like that. So how they managed to get these works and do these special, prestigious little exhibits, I have no idea, because it is a private museum.
Right.
But it's gorgeous. And it's drop-dead gorgeous as a place to visit. And also, it's a place that has really interesting temporary exhibits.
Excellent.
But to know that depending on who the person is, if it's a headliner, then you'll find yourself standing on line outside to get in.
Right. So that was André Jacquemart.
André Jacquemart.
Yeah. Moving on to the Guimet Museum of Asian Art.
Yes. It's supposed to be one of the most important Asian art museums in the world.
It's pretty big. I haven't been inside, but from the outside, it looks pretty big.
I've been inside twice, and I have to make a terrible confession, and that is there are certain aspects of Asian art that I really like. And then there are other things that are not my cup of tea.
Well, fair enough.
As you and I have talked about, you're more sculpture and I'm more painting. So but it is a museum that has an extensive, magnificent collection, mostly begun by this Mr. Guimet, and then of course it was added to by a lot of people, including Chirac. So it has...
Chirac was the French president.
French president whose passion is Asian art. It has a little of everything. So it has Japanese, Chinese, Indian, a lot of Buddhist art, a lot of sculpture, a lot of very beautiful works on screens and two-dimensional. It is an extremely important collection of Asian art, mostly permanent. I think there's some changes on the temporary level. So for anyone who is curious or interested in Asian art, it's a great place to go.
Yeah, I saw it from the outside. It's really close to the Trocadero.
It's very close to Trocadero. It's in the 16th. It's in that area that has several very nice, big, prestigious museums.
Right, and there's often, I've seen lines there, so it's a popular place.
I believe it's actually considered to be a national museum right now.
Probably is. Marmottan.
Yeah, the Marmottan, which is now
Monet
officially the Marmottan and Monet Museum, which was originally just the Marmottan.
C'est Marmottan ou Marmottan?
Marmottan. O-N.
O-N, okay.
Yeah, I think. I may be wrong.
I thought it was... I will look it up.
You think it's an A-N?
I think it's A-N, but I can be wrong.
This is another museum that's off in the boonies a little bit. Not quite as much as the Vuitton Museum of Contemporary Art. It is at the edge of the...
It's A-N.
Marmottan. Sorry there.
That's all right.
With an O-N. It's at the edge of the Bois de Boulogne, the very eastern edge. It's at the extreme western part of the 16th arrondissement. The metro stop is Passy.
Okay, yep.
And then you have to...
Chic
Very,
neighborhood.
very, very chic. Very chic and very staid. And then you either have to hoof it, which is good in nice weather, or you wait for a bus. I've done both. And it is fabulous if you like Monet.
Yeah.
It has a private but permanent collection of some of his most important pieces, strangely enough. Not the biggest, but some of the most important, including the painting that gave Impressionism its name.
Right.
And
it's called Impression.
Impression, yes. Lever du Soleil, Impression. And most of the work there was donated by Monet's son. Mm-hmm. It was a private house. Again, it's one of these beautiful 19th century mansions that has some lovely furniture. And it also has a very small collection of work by an artist whom I absolutely adore. And that is the woman Impressionist painter, Berthe Morisot. It's a lovely, lovely, lovely museum. And for anyone who is a big fan of Monet's, it is a must.
It's a must see.
It's a must see.
I haven't been. Oh my goodness.
It's a must see.
Terrible person.
No.
I need to go to Paris more. Le Petit Palais.
Le Petit Palais. Well, Le Petit Palais is across the street from the Grand Palais.
Yes, it is.
Both.
So
buildings.
it's a neighborhood of Champs-Élysées.
Champs-Élysées. It's actually, if you're...
it's along the Seine River.
Right. It's between this... If you start at the Place de la Concorde and you walk up, it's about a half a mile up. It's right there. It's right there on your left. So it's really literally between the Champs-Élysées and the river.
Yeah.
And both buildings, the little palace and the big palace, are these incredible, ornate stone buildings that were built for the Universal Fair of... I think I'm getting this right. I hope so. Of 1900. I hope this wasn't the 1889 one. I'm not sure if this was the 1889 one or the 1900 World's Fair. But both of these buildings, which are unbelievable to look at, they look like palaces, which is, of course, why they're called that.
But they're very different visually.
Well, the Petit Palais is, because it is much smaller, it's more stone and less of the big glass domes and everything. But think about it. It really does look like a palace. And when you think that was done thinking it was going to be temporary, it's kind of crazy. Like they went through all that work for something that's going to be torn down 10 years later.
So was the Eiffel Tower.
So was the Eiffel Tower,
And as a matter of fact, one of the best places to see the Grand Palais from the Eiffel Tower, you
look down.
You see it really well, and you can see it's kind of a cross-shaped.
Right. Well, the domes are all that glass. And
glass.
Iron. Yeah,
it's beautiful.
It's beautiful. And so the Petit Palais is just across the street, and it's also very gorgeous. It has a beautiful little garden in the back. It has part of it is a permanent collection of art with a lot of drawings and prints and smaller pieces, and then it also has, just like the Grand Palais, temporary exhibits. But unlike the Grand Palais, it also has a part that's a permanent collection.
Right, so it's the Musée d'Art de la Ville de Paris or something is what they call it. So it's art, fine art that the city of Paris
exactly, and it's
exhibit.
Smaller, it's charming, and it has some very nice exhibits. They tend to be exhibits of works that are on the smaller side physically. Lots of engravings, drawings.
So it probably doesn't take very long to visit that one.
No, an hour.
Yeah.
An hour is a good time for being there.
Le Musée National Picasso Paris.
The Picasso Museum. Well, the Picasso Museum, which was a long time in coming, right? Took a long, long time. What they did was they took this absolutely magnificent 17th century mansion, which is huge. Yep. Because that part of Paris, which is the Marais, was and still is filled with these incredibly enormous 17th century mansions. All the rich royalty was there. And they, of course, turned it into a museum dedicated strictly to Picasso.
Right.
because this was part of the heritage that was left to the government as payment.
Right, because he owed a lot of taxes.
Taxes, and because they took it in goods rather than money.
Which, smart.
So, but they have such a huge collection that they actually rotate what they have on exhibit. It's an enormous museum. If you want to really appreciate Picasso and see the evolution of his work, it is a must.
This is also where you will see that he was messed up in the head.
Yeah, Annie has her things about Picasso and his relationship to women. It's a fabulous museum. It's also it's so big that it's you do that, and then you go to a nice cafe and have a nice hot chocolate or a huge cappuccino, or not a whiskey, but something like that. It's in a gorgeous part of the city, and if you have any interest in Picasso, you really have to go there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very nice museum.
It's a very nice museum.
Then let's move on to la Bibliothèque Mitterrand.
Okay.
Are we on the same page?
I had added a couple more down there.
Go ahead.
Okay. The Palais de Tokyo.
Yes.
Palais de Tokyo is another one of the group of museums that is in the 16th, that is close to the Trocadero.
Yeah.
And it is right next to the museum called the Museum of Modern Art of the City of Paris. It's such a long, stupid name. I know. Both of those are made, they were built, they're housed in buildings that were built at the same time as the Trocadero. So it's the end of the 1920s, 1930.
Yeah.
That style of architecture. All of these buildings have esplanades with a view over the river and a view of the Eiffel Tower. It's a section that's just filled with this kind of stuff. And
beautiful.
It is the Palais de Tokyo, which only came to be called that, I think, about 10 years ago. And don't ask me why, because I don't really remember why. Is devoted strictly to extremely contemporary art by young artists.
I see.
So it's the cutting edge, and I'm choosing my words specifically because if you go to the Pompidou or Vuitton, you will see art that goes from the beginning of the 20th century all the way up to current times, and there's a little bit of something for everybody. This one, if you are not aware of or interested in really cutting edge contemporary stuff, this is not a place to go. It's weird. I mean, everything in it is
bizarre.
And I'm saying this, right? I mean, some of it is interesting.
Note that she is saying this.
I'm saying this, okay? Some of it is really interesting, and some of it is just like, if you want to know what's going on in the minds of young artists today, this is the place to go. And my ex-students from art school, and that's where they go. I mean, this is that kind of a place, It's right across the way from the Museum of Modern Art of the City of Paris, which is one of my favorite museums.
And it's kind of a rounded glass building, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the museum...
I've walked past it.
The other museum, which is just across the way from it, is a fabulous museum that has the overflow of what is at the Orsay in a building that's really huge, that has a spectacular view. It has a great cafe with great food, and it has a fabulous outside part that has a view over the Seine and the Eiffel Tower, and it has very good, has a small permanent collection. It also shows a lot of movies.
Which one are you talking about now?
The Museum of Modern Art of the City of Paris, which is just across the way.
Yeah.
And it also has very, very good temporary exhibits. Last year it was an exhibit of work by Warhol, who, of course, is a very considered to be a late 20th century, artist.
American.
But again, this is devoted to more or less recent work, but the two together are very interesting.
Well, if you like modern art,
if you like modern art, the museum.
I'd probably walk around going foutage de gueule.
Right. Well, that might be the case in the Palais de Tokyo, but I think in the other one, there's some really interesting stuff. I mean, they have some, and what they've done is they've renovated the basement level, like they did with the Orangerie, so that you have, because they have so much art in Paris that they don't know where to put a lot of this work. So they've added all of this exhibit space down below, which is really what makes it interesting. Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay.
Bibliothèque Mitterrand?
Mitterrand. Yeah. In the 12th, which is over on the east side. I
have never been to that.
I was
there. But is it really a library? I mean, is it a bibliothèque?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the huge, very criticized in terms of architecture, enormous national library that has an exhibit space.
Oh, I know what you mean. The big tower.
Well, those are. It's supposed to be bookends. You know what what the whole concept was.
Yeah.
Lots of people hate it. Like lots of people still hate the Pompidou Center and whatever. But besides it being a library, it has exhibit space. And
but that's kind of outside of central Paris.
Well, it's outside of central Paris, but it's not. It's really not that far from the Museum of Natural History or the Arab Institute. It's just a little further east in the 12th. So it's really easy to get to, actually, by bus, almost more than anything.
Maybe for people who've been to Paris a bazillion times.
Maybe. But it is, for people who are interested in books, the exhibits tend to be around printing or drawing or the history of books or writing. So I once saw a very lovely exhibit there. Obviously, if your first time in Paris, is not necessarily a place you would go, but very lovely exhibit of the history of certain kinds of writing. So it has that kind of stuff in the exhibit space. So it's kind of an interesting place to be. And it's the kind of place on your second and third trip you can go back home and say, look where I went. You know? Really? Yeah.
The Jewish Museum.
The Jewish Museum. It's the Museum of the History of Art and Culture of Judaism is the official long title. It's not very far from the Pompidou Center. You can actually do both very easily in the same day, but if you do those two, you've done your day. I mean, it's an exhausting thing. It's a very beautiful museum. It's kind of medium-sized. It has a permanent collection that has to do with the history of Judaism and Jewish people in both France and in Europe. And then it has temporary exhibits by specific artists, very much like the Jewish Museum in New York City. And it has different kinds of exhibits. I was there once and saw an exhibit that had to do with the history of religious architecture, but then I've been there a couple of other times and seen the work of specific contemporary artists whose work is very, very beautiful to see. So it has a great variety of different kinds of art to see, and it is very, very good to get an idea of the history of the Jewish people in Europe before and after World War II.
Right.
But it is not...
it's not a Shoah museum.
It's not a Shoah museum.
Which there are two of those in Paris.
Right. It's not a Shoah museum.
We'll talk about those two.
It's not about that. It's not about that tragedy. It's about the history of the people. Books. Has an excellent bookstore as well.
Very good. Next one is the Institut du Monde Arabe.
Yes,
we're staying in the same neighborhood.
Yes. Well, actually, we're back to the practically.
Neighborhood, historically.
Right. Right, exactly. Except that we're back to the area around the Mitterrand Library. This is a place that I absolutely love.
Oh.
The building is really interesting. I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember the name of the architect, but it's a very, very interesting building itself. It has fabulous exhibits, absolutely fabulous exhibits by contemporary artists that come out of the Arab world and by and it also has exhibits of ancient things. It has an incredible bookstore, absolutely incredible, one of the best I've ever seen in a museum. And it has part of it a permanent collection, and it has a terrace where you can have tea and look out over the Seine.
Yes, apparently the terrace is gorgeous.
The terrace is gorgeous.
For photographers,
I happen to love this
recommended.
exhibit, this museum. I've seen several different kinds of exhibits there. Also, which kind of makes sense in it, but it does actually make me laugh because I had this as an experience personally. On Christmas Day, it is open.
Oh, that's good.
And there aren't too many museums in Paris that are open on Christmas Day. I once saw I like textiles a lot. I once saw an exhibit of the history of rugs that are from all the different
Persian
countries.
Rugs, maybe?
Well, you have Persian and Afghani and Tunisian. I mean, it was
all sorts.
It was like going into 1,001 Nights.
Wow,
it was fabulous. I've also seen exhibits of contemporary artists with painting and things like that, and it's a really neat place to go. I really
sounds
like
cool.
It a lot. It was sponsored by Mitterrand, actually.
Was it Mitterrand?
Yeah,
I was
it was
thinking.
Mitterrand.
I was thinking it was Chirac, but maybe
No,
it's
I think it was Mitterrand, actually.
very
yeah.
nice, very nice. This is one that I've meant to go to many times, and I still haven't. Museum of Natural History.
Yeah,
we're going back to the classics now.
We're going back to we're going back, but we're staying in the same neighborhood. We're not too far away. We're going to one of the oldest museums in the history of France.
Yeah.
Created by Louis XIV himself, who had exotic animals brought to France. I think one of the first ones was a giraffe and things like that. And so before it became a public museum, it was a collection of living and dead things that have to do with natural history.
Yeah.
And at the time of the Revolution, became the Museum of Natural History, using largely things that had been collected by various members of royalty and nobility and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And it is one of the most important museums of natural history in the world.
Yeah.
I think it's not quite as big as the one in New York, but it is very, very important. And it is a museum that has a lot that's fun for children to see.
Yeah, I think this is one
great.
where I would take a kid.
It has a huge...
Now, when I say kid, kid is a broad thing.
Right.
Because there's a huge difference between I'm going with my 2-month-old and I'm
Right.
going with my 12-year-old.
Right, exactly.
Completely different
Right.
cup of tea here. So, your kids, but I think Natural History Museum is probably good from 6 on.
I would think so.
Yeah.
And they do...
Maybe younger, so depending on the kid. I don't
think
know.
in the more recent times, they have reoriented it so that there are things for kids. It's got the classical kind of diorama stuff, but also it has other activities and it has some temporary exhibits, and it's got lots and lots of animals and skeletons. And part of it's connected to the Jardin des Plantes.
Right.
Which is the botanical gardens, which was also really begun under Louis XIV. Mm-hmm. And so between the two of them...
These are fun to visit.
They're fun.
Yeah.
They're fun. The botanical gardens is really beautiful. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to pay to go into the museum to go to the gardens part.
Yeah.
You can just sit there. It's a big park.
And these are
it's
probably
really
all
beautiful.
parts of the museum pass anyway.
I would think they are,
Yeah.
yes. And it's really a fun place to go.
Mm-hmm. Le Musée de l'Armée, where Napoleon's tomb is.
Where? Okay, so you have actually two parts to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have the Museum of the Army, which is really in this huge, enormous...
Les Invalides.
Les Invalides, which is still used. Mm-hmm. It's not only the Museum of the Army, which means it's got a collection of arms and armor
weapons
and weapons of every kind that go up. It was, again, started by Louis XIV, and it was designed to be a place for wounded soldiers to go who had no homes or who needed care. And that's why it's called Les Invalides.
Yeah.
And it's still used for official ceremonies.
Invalid, yeah.
Right? When very important famous people die, the ceremonies for them...
it's done in the courtyard.
It's done in the courtyard, which is huge.
Yeah,
it's an enormous...
It's a very stately place.
Very stately, very big. And then Napoleon, who... we cannot say was a modest person. When he prepared for his, what would be the right word? He prepared for his eternity by taking the chapel, which is a Baroque chapel from the 17th century, and cutting into the back wall of it so that he could add on this other building, which is where his tomb is.
Right.
And where
By
the
itself.
tombs of his favorite generals are as well. Mm-hmm. And so all of this connected is now one enormous monument. You can go in from one side, you can go in from the other, and then you go through the passageway and you come out the other side.
Right.
It's rather impressive. This gold-covered dome with this
I have
marble.
friends who went with young teens, boys, who loved it.
Yeah.
Because, they like guns
arms and guns and cannons. There are cannons everywhere.
Cannons.
I have to say that the bookstore part is actually pretty interesting because it covers everything up to into current wars and like World War II. But it's not my thing.
Right.
History of guns and armor.
Right.
I mean, the chapel is really cool. It's a really incredible Baroque chapel. And seeing the megalomaniac tomb of Napoleon is kind of cool too, because the marble that he used for
it's beautiful.
is absolutely gorgeous. It's just enormous. But I could live without seeing the evolution of pistols. What can I tell you?
I did an episode. It was episode 153. That's titled "Why is Napoleon buried at Les Invalides in Paris?"
Yes,
and it kind of goes into not so much what the building is like, but why did he end up there? It's an interesting story.
And at first, he wasn't there, of course.
Right. It's an interesting story.
Well, he's somewhere happy that he is there now, I guess.
I guess, but. Not that I worry about that too much. But see, again, this is one of these. It would be a minor museum by Elyse's standards, but it would be a really important museum by somebody who loves army
Absolutely.
and that type of thing. And there are plenty of people like that.
Absolutely. And quite honestly, if you have the museum pass and you're interested in seeing what beautiful classical architecture of the 17th century looks like, it's worth going to it just for that. It's gorgeous.
It's pretty when it's lit up at night.
It's beautiful, yeah.
I'll put a picture of the
Golden Dome.
Yeah, yes, that's the Golden Dome in Paris.
Right, exactly.
You see it like from when you're at the Rodin Museum, you see this Golden Dome.
Yep,
that's it.
That's
Les Invalides. All right, next one, le Musée des Arts Décoratifs.
Yes,
and Espace Mode et Textile.
Yes,
because you told me they were together.
They're connected. Actually, they're run by the same group. Or okay, Museum of Decorative Arts. I love. Absolutely love.
That's the one.
It's the one that's it's a separate museum, but it's in the same structures as the Louvre. So it's on Rue de Rivoli. It is fabulous. It is a museum.
Recently, they had the Dior exhibit. I don't know if it's over, but
it's over.
Yeah,
it was probably the only time in my life that I couldn't stand the crowds in a museum.
That crowded.
It really got to me. I have to admit, it was one of the most successful exhibits that have ever been shown anywhere, and nobody expected it to be quite that in demand. And so what happened was that even though you had to book ahead for a time to go in, the way they set up there's a science of creating exhibits. It was awful. It was awful. It was awful. The things that you could see were fascinating if you're particularly interested in fashion, and it was interesting. But unfortunately, it was enough to make anybody who's even mildly claustrophobic have a total panic attack. But the museum itself is in this absolutely magnificent building that is structurally from the outside part of the Louvre. I'm not sure how that works in terms of it being separated off, but it has a fabulous, fabulous collection, permanent collection of design things. So furniture, jewelry, everything connected to textiles, all of those kinds of things. And one wing of the building is devoted to temporary exhibits. And what they did with the Dior show is that they took over the entire museum.
I see.
Practically. It's a museum that has 4 floors. It's a huge...
so it's big.
It's a big museum. For anybody who's interested in anything connected to
design, architecture,
interior design, all of those things, it's fabulous. And it's part of the whole system of national museums.
Yeah. And this is probably a good place for people who are... even if you're doing web design or things like that, it's good to see where the fundamentals of design came from.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because that's...
And they always have usually fun and interesting temporary exhibits.
All right. Shall we talk about Nissim de Camondo?
Yeah. Another one of these tiny little museums that is really interesting. I discovered its existence because of a book we read. And now...
You can't remember it?
Now I can. We read it for our book club.
Right. I don't remember it either.
It was the book about the ceramics, the Japanese little ceramics.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, I'll have to figure it out, and then we'll...
I can add it to the show notes.
It.
Yeah.
The museum is the home... It is a building in a very chic... It's right next to Parc Monceau.
Oh, yeah.
And in a lovely, 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 lovely chic part of Paris. And it is the house that was built by the Camondo family in the middle of the 19th century. This family was a very, very wealthy family, and they were bankers. And they, unfortunately, were deported during World War II.
They're Jewish?
They were Jewish.
Okay.
The family was originally from Turkey, and then part of the family had gone to England, and a part of the family had gone to another country, and a part of the family had established in Paris. And so it was like the third or fourth generation already. Their son served in World War I. One of the sons was killed in World War I fighting with the French. And in the 1930s, part of the family left, and part of the family did not leave. And when the Germans came, they were deported. But I don't remember exactly the story. The patriarch of the family was able to, before that happened, leave the house with all of the furniture and all of the artwork in it to the city of Paris.
I see.
So it was, I believe, unfortunately, even occupied by the Germans during World War II, but nothing was destroyed. And so as soon as World War II ended, the building and everything in it was turned into a museum. And it's very beautiful. It's filled with...
so it's probably stayed the same way for a long time.
So you get to see what the taste was, because these were people who were collectors of art and objects and very beautiful, beautiful pieces. And it's a very lovely, it's kind of a quiet place. Everything is exactly the way it was. All the furnishings are there. All the artwork on the walls are there. The garden is absolutely gorgeous. So it has a certain nostalgia to it at the same time.
Yeah.
I went there.
It's kind of a tragic story too, so it's probably a little bit
you don't
sobering.
It's sobering unless you don't know the story.
Do they talk about it in the museum?
There's just a handout that you can get. But I went with my sister, and I took her because I wanted to see this museum, because I'd read this book about the family. And it was gorgeous. It was really lovely. After that, we went and had a snack in the Parc Monceau, and
which is also a lovely place
to
go hang out.
Lovely place. And really, if you're interested in decorative arts, that's why it's interesting as a kind of thing to follow the Museum of Decorative Arts. It's a lovely place to visit to get an idea of what the tastes were in the second half of the 19th century and the first part of the 20th century.
Very interesting.
And it has an interesting history, of course, attached to it.
Cool. Le Musée du Quai Branly.
Yes, indeed.
That one I haven't been to either.
Oh, well, I have to make a confession. I was there once. It's enormous. Absolutely enormous. This is Jacques Chirac's baby. This is really his baby. It is a huge, huge, huge museum of what are called the traditional arts of everything outside of Europe.
Oh, so I thought it was African art.
No, it's everything. In other words, there's a huge section on Polynesia and what they call Oceania. A huge section on Australia. A huge section on Africa. A huge section on South America.
Okay.
It's got everything.
So it's more ethnic art.
It's what
carvings.
They call now traditional art. So you have carving, sculpture, textiles, everything imaginable. And honestly, I went, and because it was so fascinating, after 3 hours, had realized I hadn't done more than 2/3 of the museum.
Wow.
And couldn't handle anymore. So
right.
It's a museum
it's a large museum that will take a long time.
It takes a long time, unless you're specifically interested only in the work of a specific part of the world.
Right. If you wanted to see Australian
Aboriginal art.
Yeah.
If you can go and see that. It's again a museum that's on the museum pass, so it's one of those you can go in
Come and
out
go as you wish. Yeah.
But like a lot of the, at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, there's also that kind of thing. But not as much, because the Metropolitan doesn't have as an extensive collection of Australian or Polynesian or things like that. But if you're interested in those kinds of arts and African art, which is fabulous to see, it's a great museum.
Fantastic. All right, let's talk about Les Égouts de Paris.
Oh, do we have to?
We have to.
Stinky poo.
It's kind of a museum, but it's a thing that you experience, and the experience is not necessarily pleasant.
It is. It's really the public is invited to go, huh?
Yes, you can see just a tiny bit of it, and they explain how égout sewers have made life much better. I'm grateful for sewers. I just don't want to be
sewers.
but I don't want to be in them. So, but you get to be in them for an hour or so,
Really?
and it's terribly smelly. And
Do they give you special boots?
no, they give you nothing. They give you nothing, but it's fairly clean. I mean, you're not going to get.
Okay.
You're not going to go trudging through the.
All right.
No.
No.
But you are going to be walking right over, and they have this like metal kind of grill thing that you walk over, but the sewer is right underneath,
really?
so the
Really?
smell is all there.
Okay.
It's a full experience smell-wise.
Do they explain how those were carved out at all? Is that part of what they do?
Probably, but I don't recall that. They talk about the maintenance and the maintenance workers and things like that. That has to be one of the worst jobs one can do, but
Probably.
they are apparently paid well, and a lot of them do that from father to son. It's
Really?
it's almost like a
Closed corporation. Huh?
yeah. And we talked about that at length in episode 125. So if you want to know more about it, go to that episode. Let's move on to Cité de l'Architecture et du Patrimoine, or Musée des Monuments Français.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. This is another one that I love. I absolutely love.
It's on the Trocadero.
It is on the Trocadero. It is in one of these monumental buildings that was constructed in the 1930s, and thank goodness, because this is a museum that has scale 1, which means life-size reproductions of the facades of all the important medieval churches in France.
Wow.
And this is one of the most
Life size?
life-size. That's what they call scale 1. That means
So
it's,
like Cathédrale de Reims, you see
yes, you will see the facade. That is, you will see the opening, the
life size.
Yes, life size. That
just blows my mind.
The ceilings of the ground floor, which is where all of this is, are, I guess, the equivalent of 3 or 4 stories high. And many of these reproductions were begun in the 19th century, at the same time as they were preparing to repair Notre Dame and Chartres and places like that. And they were able to, before the modern techniques, now think of what you could do with 3D printing and all of that.
Yeah.
They were able to reproduce in the tiniest detail, and some of them even with putting back on the faded color on some of them, all of these absolutely exquisite medieval entranceways to the major cathedrals.
So that would be a really interesting exhibit. To me, I would love that.
It's fabulous. Not only that, but the way many of them are set up, you can walk around them and you can actually see how it's constructed from the back. So it's a stage set. But
Yeah.
it is. I discovered it literally with my husband. So this is maybe 5 years ago. It was like, this is on the list of things. Hey, what's this? Let's check it out. And of course, he's really interested in old architecture. The two of us, I swear, we spent an hour and a half with our jaws open.
Yeah.
We could not believe what we had walked into. It is unbelievable. There are 2 or 3 reproductions of Renaissance or medieval homes, civil architecture. But the majority of the things on the ground floor are religious architecture. But if you can't go outside of Paris and you want to see close up, literally close up, what some of these
major cathedrals
and churches look like, and a couple of the monasteries.
So there's probably Reims, Chartres,
Yep.
Amiens, all of that.
Vézelay, I think Moissac is even there. Conques is there with the opening. And then when you go up above, it's the history of architecture in France. And so it's for people who want to see historical structure, the ground floor is literally enough. If you are really passionate about architecture, you continue. There are 2 more floors, and you have everything. You have Viollet-le-Duc, you have Le Corbusier. There's some interactive stuff, so you get to see the changes that were done on things as they were repaired in the 19th century. There was an exhibit about Viollet-le-Duc a couple of years ago that showed how interesting he was and what a crazy man he was at the same time, But it's fabulous, and it's in these
Wow, that's what I'm going to put on my list for sure.
It's great. It's absolutely great.
I love architecture. And I know that we have lots of architects who listen to the show. So,
Yes.
I think you will be...
and it's right on the Trocadero.
Right, it's right on Trocadero.
Right.
So it's really a good one to... It's easy to get to.
Not only that, but, this is one of those things. I've been back a few times. So you have these enormous doorways that you swear are made out of real stone and everything. And then a few of them you can walk around and you see how it's all, fake with the wood in the back and everything. And then you peek out the window and you're looking at the Eiffel Tower.
Right. It's right there.
How much better can you get?
Oh, and there's a nice Moroccan restaurant right there too.
Yes.
Sawiya, I think it's called. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's one that I've been to a few times. Love it.
You've been to a few times. We went there with a group last year.
We went with a group, and I went there by myself as well. And yummy.
Yum, yum.
Yeah. Let's move on to the Philharmonie de Paris.
Have you been there?
I have been there. I have not been inside of the Musée de la Musique because it's fairly new. It's one of these buildings that has beautiful architecture. It's shiny. It's another kind of wannabe Guggenheim or that sort of style of museum, but it is magnificent. I think lots of Parisians, my cousins, will tell me that it's ugly as hell.
Where is it?
Oh. So this one is Porte de Pantin, next to that, La Villette, that kind of area, 19th arrondissement.
Northern part of Paris.
Parisians see it all the time when they drive the périphérique because it's right along the périphérique. And that's why they don't like it. It's because they just drive past that big thing, which from the périphérique, you don't really get a feel for how beautiful it is. You have to get off, folks, and you have to go walk around it. It's gorgeous. Wow. And it's one of these places that has temporary exhibits. They have performance spaces for students of the Conservatoire de Musique.
Right.
And the Museum of Music, I'm told, is fabulous. But the last time I was there, we arrived late enough that it wasn't worth going in because it was going to close in like 20 minutes. And you need a good hour and a half to see it. But it's one where I definitely want to go back to.
I will go.
And it's gorgeous. In my opinion, gorgeous. Okay. See, that's modern stuff I like.
Yeah.
There's some modern stuff I really love. When it's complex.
Yes, like the Breton Center, I really like too.
Right. When it's a complex architectural thing, I love that. But when it's a block, I'm like,
no, that's true. It's ugly.
We've done blocks for a long time. What's so new about that? Nothing at all. La crypte archéologique du Parvis de Notre-Dame.
Yeah, I love this place.
Yes, that's a nice one.
It's really fun.
It's right Notre-Dame. Notre-Dame. You have the Parvis de Notre-Dame. Yeah, in the Esplanade. You have the entrance to this smallish museum.
Well, it's small. Yeah, it's actually small. And of course, I think a lot of people don't even realize that it's there. And not only that, but if you're standing on the Esplanade facing the Cathedral of Notre Dame, you're walking on it. What it is a small museum space that shows what the city of Paris looked like at the Roman times and then early medieval times, because they were doing archaeological digs right there. And when they uncovered some of the ancient Roman structure, which was mostly on the other side of the river, but there was a little bit right there on the island. And then the very, very, very earliest of the medieval structure, they left it exposed. So when you go down, it's like walking through a maze. And you have these huge sections of wall, and you have these blocks of stone. And what's very good is that there's a lot of interactive stuff that they've done recently. So you can see what the supposed structure looked like when it was full and when it was finished.
I see.
So you get an idea of...
So like projection.
Yeah.
That's nice.
I can't remember now if it's actually on the computers that are sitting there or if it's on the wall. But rather than just seeing a bunch of stone, you can see that it's sections of wall and things like that. You get a much better idea of what ancient Paris looked like, and it's really kind of neat.
That sounds like a cool place to take kids, older kids, maybe.
I guess so. I think like with adults, it's a question of what's interesting to them. And it's not very big.
Right.
It's not very big at all.
Oh, and the beautiful thing is, it's right there, man. Right there. You don't have to. Go anywhere. You're right there.
And it's really easy to just go in for half an hour and come back out and then visit Notre Dame or go over to the Sainte-Chapelle or whatever you want to do.
Okay, move on. We've been talking a long time. This is going to be a long episode, folks. Let's see.
Palais de la Découverte.
Palais de la Découverte.
That's
I haven't been. So next to the Trocadero, you also have the Palais de la Découverte, or Univers Science is what it's called. I'm going to check and make sure we're not saying dumb things, because this is the one where neither of us have been.
No.
So we haven't talked about, so far we've only talked about the ones where one of us has been.
Right.
But this one we haven't. But because it's good for kids,
it's
we
great
need
for
to
kids.
mention it.
And it has a lot of, it prepares and programs things that are specifically of interest to kids, because of course you have lots of school holidays, and so it's a great place to take them.
Oh, it's close to the Petit Palais, actually.
It's close to the Petit Palais.
Yeah, close to the Petit Palais, not the Trocadero.
And it's got lots of interesting discovery kinds of things.
Something that you might want to consider if your kids love science museums. That would be a good one.
It's a great one.
Okay, moving on. The Pantheon.
The Pantheon.
We've done a whole episode. That was episode 71 about it. A stately place. Huge. It probably take you an hour to visit it.
Yeah, I think an hour is a good. I mean, unless it's this monumental dome, right? It's this monumental domed building that was actually originally designed to be a church, and then became a secular memorial building. We can, I guess,
this is a problem because France was a very, very religious country for a very long time, and then at the revolution they did away with all of that. And then what you left with is empty. I mean, church is really important to for weddings, funerals, for burials. It's part of the culture, and so they couldn't eradicate all of that completely, so they replaced it with this Pantheon thing.
They called it the Temple of Reason.
Right.
It was originally meant to be a Baroque church, that was started actually under Louis XV and then not finished until after the Revolution, and then it became the Temple of Reason, and now it's an homage to
the greats.
And if current events, it says homage to great men, and now it's going to be changed to the men and women.
Yes.
Because...
they have realized that there's a sore lack of women in there. Yes. There's only a few. Marie Curie is there, so is her husband. So this is what happened. Famous women who are buried there, Marie Curie is one of them. Her husband was not near as famous as her, right? But she insisted, like in her lifetime, she said, I want to be buried with him. Right. So they put him in there as well. Right. And it's going to be the same with Simone Weil. She also said, I'm going to be buried with my husband, who was a wonderful human being, but not near as famous as she was. But yet he's going to go to the Pantheon. Right. But it never worked the other way around.
No.
So all these men that they buried, and I'm sure their wives had a lot to do with their success and their brilliance, but none of the women were put in.
And it was a big deal to put women in. Now, of course, that will change a bit, I think, with the way things are going.
It's the way history has gone in a lot of places. Right. Women have always done outstanding things. It's just we don't notice.
Yeah.
Even us, women, we don't notice the extraordinary things that other women do.
That's true.
Because we pay more attention to the men.
As
right.
Much.
It's just where we put our attention. Anyway, that's another cultural discussion. But the Pantheon is an interesting place to see. I wouldn't say that I would put it on my must-do list, but if you're at the Jardin du Luxembourg
and you want to just see it,
you could at least see the outside.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't cost very much to go in. If you have the museum pass, it's included. It's worth a little walkabout. It's a fun place, I think. And of course, I would say go see the church Saint-Étienne-du-Mont rather than the Pantheon inside. But that's just me.
Both.
Right.
Both. Okay.
In Paris, you also have a Musée Grévin.
Yes.
Which is a wax
museum.
Ouais, bof,
Yeah.
bof.
It actually, amazingly, gets an enormous number of people.
Yeah, lots of people go because that's the museum they've heard of, right? That's the problem with all these museums is before we go, I think this is human nature. Before we go into a museum, we're like, oh, am I going to like it? Is it going to be boring? You know? And the Musée Grévin has this kind of approachable aspect to it. And so people don't think it's going to be boring and they just go.
But you know what's interesting? I don't know if this is true of the one in London. They constantly update
Yes.
the figures, so they change them.
They get your picture taken by all these famous people. It's kind of fun.
I guess so. I mean,
I've been to the one in London. I haven't been to the one in Paris, but I've been to the one in London.
I haven't.
Yeah, but you're a snob.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I just seeing a wax version of a human being just kind of gives me the creeps. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd rather see a sculpture anyway. So.
Le musée des Arts et Métiers in Paris.
Yes.
Lovely. I love that one.
Tiny little museum connected to the School of Arts et Métiers, which is kind of in the dead center. It's in the second arrondissement. It's not really hard to get to from almost anywhere in that area. I surprisingly have seen two wonderful exhibits that have stayed in my mind for a long time. One was about the history of maps. I love maps. I think maps are beautiful.
Yes.
And it was about the history of map making and the maps starting from the Middle Ages, going up through modern times. And another one was about the history of alphabets.
Yes.
And different kinds of writing systems.
Yeah, when I went, it was the temporary exhibit was about animation, the history of animation, how they did that. Yeah. But anyway, the permanent collection there is fabulous too. I mean, you have this beautiful Foucault pendulum.
Yes.
And it runs, and they have a few times a day, they have somebody who will come and explain how it works, which is really fast, and show it. They put things on the ground, and it knocks.
Like the one in the Pantheon, then?
Yes, like that. It's very nice. I think the Arts et Métiers is a great museum for kids. You also have kind of a history of computers, of computing. You see the old machines. Some of us are old enough to tell our kids, "Oh my goodness, I had a machine like that."
or I remember when there weren't any.
Yes, or that. Anyway, the Arts et Métiers is wonderful, and there's this beautiful one of the first attempts at the Statue of Liberty that Bertoldi made is in the courtyard. You don't even have to go inside. You don't even have to go inside. And so if you want to see a smaller, it's not a replica because it's actually before he made the real one, he made smaller ones. And there's one in the Luxembourg Garden and one
there
at the Arts et Métiers. And it's beautiful.
It's a great little museum. It has a nice little garden. And
you can probably spend a good 2 hours there. You know, you can spend time there if you want, but you could also do it kind of quickly. Yeah. I'm very glad I went.
You're very glad
glad I went.
You can actually walk there from Pompidou Center and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, we need to talk about the catacombs because that's not really a museum. It's not really a museum, but we talked about it at length. Well, some on episode 39.
Right.
It's it's very famous because it's very striking. So what it is you go downstairs to these kind of the tunnels.
The tunnels.
Tunnels where they have stacked bones.
Yes.
And what they did is they took similar bones and stacked them.
Yeah. This is when they evacuated the cemeteries in the 19th century.
Right. Cemeteries were too full. They needed to remove the bones. And so what they did is they have a section. So there's a plaque down there that says, the bones here are from cemetery, blah, 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 section, blah, blah, blah. But you have all stacked femurs, and then you have all stacked skulls and various bones. Anyway, it's something that lots of people love to go. It's sobering.
Yes.
kids, if they're not impressionable, will love it.
Yeah.
Because, it's very, I don't think you're supposed to touch them.
No, I don't think you can.
But there's nobody in there making, it's not like they have people watching
it's lots
you.
of walking.
Yeah, it's walking. So you go down the stairs, you walk through there and back up. The problem with this one is that there's often a wait. So for this one, you really should book it ahead of time because it's very, very popular with tourists.
And the tunnels are part of the system that was dug through by the Romans.
Right. Though the tunnels are ancient.
Tunnels are ancient.
Okay, let's talk about some houses where a famous person lived. And I don't think you have that in the printout, or do you?
Yeah.
You do? Okay.
Maison de Balzac.
Right, the Maison de Balzac. You can go ahead.
Balzac, of course, was one of the great 19th century writers, French writers. And he lived in a little house in a part of what is now Paris that at the time was actually a separate village, the village of Passy. So it's in the 16th arrondissement, which is the kind of western
very
part.
Posh today.
Very posh today. And it's
not too far from the Eiffel Tower. It's that
on the other side.
Right. It's on the other side, but it's not too far.
It's typical of the kind of place like that is that when you go to visit the house, you see everything that he had. In other words, the room where he wrote with the inkwells and the pens and things like that, and his furniture. It's not a very big house. I believe he was a bachelor, and it's got a charming little garden around it. What's really interesting is that aside from the feel you get for the person, it's down this little road, and you get a glimpse of what must have been the village in the 19th century.
It's a nice neighborhood. It's an interesting neighborhood to walk through. It's very posh today. Lots of rich people now live around there.
And Balzac was the writer who had to have coffee all day long.
Oh, I see.
He was a fanatic. Apparently, I don't remember. I remember recently I read something about it. I'm a coffee person, but I don't drink as much as I used to. But this guy was like a total nutcase when it came to coffee. He lived on coffee, basically. He was not a drinker a lot.
Not of alcohol.
But he basically...
It's probably not any better than alcohol for you. Maybe not. Maybe it is. I don't know.
He basically lived on strong coffee.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So he's the author of Madame Bovary, obviously.
Madame Bovary.
If you studied French in college, they made you read Madame Bovary.
Yes, he's really one of the great French writers.
Yes. And he's...
Père Goriot.
Yeah. Some really good books. Maison Victor Hugo.
Yes.
Victor Hugo. Oh, my buddy Victor Hugo. Place des Vosges. That one... for as much as Maison de Balzac is a little bit out of the way, you're not likely to walk right past it without knowing. The Maison Victor Hugo, you've probably walked near it if you've been to the Place des Vosges. Right. So that one, it's interesting, right? It's free.
It's free, and it was his city center house because he had a very big house outside of the city. Mm-hmm. He also had a place on one of the Anglo-Norman islands.
Right.
So this was his little town place. Mm-hmm. And of course, you should have money to buy this little town place,
Yeah,
I
wouldn't mind.
It was not quite that. Yeah. And he did do some writing there.
Yes.
He did some entertaining there. He did some writing there. It's
lovely. I think if you have the time, if you're on the Place des Vosges and you have the time, it's definitely a good one, I think.
Because he certainly is a national hero.
Yes. Well, of course, Les Misérables, really Notre-Dame de Paris.
Right. He helped save huge chunks of Paris.
Right. So. I mentioned that I did an episode recently on Quasimodo and Esmeralda. Let's see, which one was it? I can't remember the number. It's terrible. I can never remember the number of my own episodes. So this episode, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, it was called episode 181. It wasn't that far long ago. I should remember it. Where I tell you the kind of the summary of the story of Quasimodo and Esmeralda as Victor Hugo wrote it. I loved listening to that book. And right now I'm listening to Les Misérables, but I'm listening to the unabridged.
It's long.
And I should have gotten the abridged. Because there's lots of parts of it where it's like just musings on history.
Yes. Well, that's Victor Hugo.
Which are interesting, but I want the story. Get back to the story. Anyway, so that's the Maison Victor Hugo at
Place des Vosges.
Place des Vosges, yes. There are a couple of really nice photography museums in Paris that
Yes.
I haven't been to, which
She
is
hasn't
crazy
been
because
to.
I'm
going to drag her there. One of them is the museum of. It's called the International Center of Photography. It's right in the heart of the Marais. It's not very big, and it has lots and lots of really good temporary exhibits by different photographers. But it's also a place that is known for giving lectures. They have conferences. They have a bookstore. It's
the type of museum where they show photographies.
Yes.
Not cameras.
No. It's the
Right.
work of the photographers.
Right. So if you want to see a ton of cameras, very old cameras, you go to the Arts Métiers. They have, I was fascinated by all of that. They have all sorts of the original, cameras that they built when the craft started. It's very fun.
Right. Yeah. This is photography.
Yeah,
This is the work. And the other one, of course, is the Jeu des Paumes.
Jeu de Paume, yeah.
Which is the twin to the Orangerie at the end of the Tuileries. And it is a building that also was built at about the same time, but it is devoted strictly to contemporary photography.
Yeah.
Just photography.
Yeah.
So for people who are interested in photography, you have some very wonderful exhibits there.
That's good. Okay, museums that are good for kids, but not just for kids. You have the Curie Museum, which I talked about in episode 79. And I also give you a summary of Marie Curie's life, which I thought was fascinating. Another one that I've been to is the Musée des Arts Forains.
Yeah, I've been there too.
Oh, you have?
Yes, in Bercy.
Bercy, yes.
In Bercy.
That's a little bit out of the way, but it's not so far out of the way that it's a problem to get to it. It's fairly easy. Well, by bus.
By bus.
That one you go by bus. Don't try the metro. It'll confuse you. But right next to it, you also have Bercy Village.
I was going to say.
Which is also kind of fun.
Which is fun. This is actually an area that was the wholesale wine area, and they reconverted all of these buildings, so you have lots of little cool and sort of chic restaurants and boutiques.
Café boutiques.
And then they turned this depot into the museum of everything connected to circuses and fairs and rides and things like that.
Really interesting. So this one, they don't do English only tours, I don't think.
I don't think so.
But the guides are very good because they often have people who don't speak perfect French. So the guides are very good at switching. So they will say something in French and then they will say it in beautifully French accent English.
I was there actually with my husband, so I don't know what they do or do not do in English.
Yeah.
But it's fun and it's great for kids.
It's great for kids because you get to ride some of the attractions.
Yes.
And if you happen to be in Paris between Christmas and New Year, maybe it starts a little bit before Christmas, I'm not sure. But at that time, all of the attractions are turned on and you can play them all. You can do them all. When you do a regular visit, there's only a few that you can do, that you can play. And you actually ride them or play them. I mean, it's kind of fun. But that festive, during the holidays, all of them you can play. It's fun.
When I was there,
it's really
I don't know which time I don't remember what time of year, but there were people in costume. So I don't know if that was a special occasion.
I don't remember costumes, but why not?
There were people that were wearing costumes like they were from the 19th century or early 20th century. So maybe it was a special weekend where they were doing some special shows. But it's fun. It's a great place for kids.
Yeah, great place for kids. That one I definitely recommend. The Chocolate Museum in Paris is kind of interesting. I've been to that one. I did an episode. It was episode 70. It's not very big, but you get to see all the history of chocolate, and you get to taste. So it's a fun one for kids. It's not very far out of the way. It's a Grand Boulevard, but a little further out. But it's not too hard to get to. Good one for kids, I think.
Good one for kids.
There's a Musée de la Magie that I've been to as well when my daughter was like maybe 7 or 8, and she liked magic. Of course, at that age, it's perfect, right? You have that age when kids are just fascinated by magic, and you get to see some of the magical cabinets that Monsieur Houdin did,
Houdini?
Well, Houdini is the American one. Houdin is the French one.
Oh.
So Houdini named himself after Houdin.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Oh.
And who was... he was very good at building trick cabinets.
Huh.
And so...
Making people disappear.
Yeah, to do all sorts of things. A lot of magic is actually based on work he did. And it's very interesting to see that they used Houdin to bedazzle. Like, this is the time when he was alive at the time when Algeria was being colonized by the French, and they wanted to just impress the sheiks and all of these people, and they brought Houdini to do the bullet trick.
Wow.
He's the one who introduced the bullet trick. So where somebody shoots a gun and the bullet ends up between the teeth. That's an old trick, right? It's a really difficult trick, and it's not one that a lot of magicians did or do, but he's the one who invented it. And anyway, so it's a fascinating history. That one was interesting, and there's a magic show as part of it.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, it's a cool little thing. There's also a museum of dolls, which I would never go to because, like, all these dolls would just drive me nuts.
Why would they drive you nuts? Is it spooky?
Maybe.
Some people, I have never been, but I know some people who like it.
Mm-hmm. I also did an episode on the Wine Museum, also not far from the Eiffel Tower. That one was episode 124. So for wine lovers, it's perfect. There's a museum of crime in Paris.
Ooh.
Yes, there's a museum of le Musée de la Chasse et de la Nature.
Yes, which people have said is very good.
Yes, I've heard nothing but good things about that one. It has a lot of... you don't say stuffed. You say...
What? Stuffed animals?
Well, no, stuffed animal is like a teddy bear. You say...
There's a word for it. Yeah, I know what you mean, though. The kind that they put in the Museum of Natural History and...
Yeah.
When they're...
They go through some sort
taxidermy.
Taxidermy.
Taxidermy. I don't know what the right adjective is. We're blocking it.
Yeah.
They're stuffed.
Yeah.
You know?
But they're not teddy bears.
But they're not teddy bears.
They're taxidermied.
Taxidermed, but I don't think that's not the right word. There's another word.
And
for
all
it.
the photos I've seen of it look really, really nice. It's like all wood paneling, and it looks like an old museum. Anyway, I haven't been, so I don't want to talk about it too much. But I hear good things about that one.
I know people like it, but I'm not sure I would be. That would be my thing.
We would be remiss not to mention the Musée Carnavalet,
yes,
which is closed,
unfortunately,
until late 2019.
Yes.
But I think when it reappears, it's going to be glorious because they're redoing everything.
And it is the museum of the history of Paris.
Right.
And it is in this gorgeous 17th century mansion right in the dead heart of the Marais. And so my guess is that it will be lucky if it's open at the day that they say it will be. But
I don't think they've announced the date.
When it opens, it will be fabulous.
Right. There's also the conciergerie,
yes,
which we have not done an episode about.
We haven't?
Which really kills me because it's one that we both like.
We have to.
Yes.
There we go. The conciergerie, which is, of course, next to Sainte-Chapelle, which is the oldest palace in Paris.
Yeah.
It is the original palace of the Capetian kings.
Yes.
And it was, it's the inspiration for the castle in Disneyland.
Yeah.
With its rounded domes. And
it's gorgeous.
And it's gorgeous on the outside.
It's got a lot of history from the French Revolution.
Right.
It's got the chapel to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette.
Right.
It has some of the dresses that she wore. I mean, anyway,
it's incredible.
Yeah, it's a really good museum.
And it's a twin ticket with Sainte-Chapelle. And it's literally right next door.
Yeah, right next door. It's right city center.
Right.
This is one that, I don't know that everybody needs to see it, but if you want to see medieval architecture,
yes,
you see the big massive fireplaces.
That's right.
And the interesting way they did like corkscrew staircases.
Yes.
If you're interested in the history of the French Revolution,
particularly,
you definitely need to go. There's some really good displays that you will just sit and watch that thing for a long time, and you'll learn about the French Revolution.
And really, even on the outside, it's quite impressive because it's huge and it takes up a good chunk of the island.
Mm-hmm. Another one is the Arène de Lutèce, which several people have mentioned to me, but I always...
I've been.
Okay.
I've been several times.
It's closed whenever I go.
Well, it's basically a Roman ruin.
Right.
I mean, it's off Rue Monge, and it's behind the Rue Mouffetard. So it's in that section.
So the neighborhood is really good.
It's a wonderful neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's the back end of the Latin Quarter.
Yes.
And it was, I don't remember when it was uncovered, because it was discovered, and it was uncovered because it was there. But it's not super impressive because it's not a huge arena.
Yeah.
We actually have one here in Toulouse that's actually bigger. But
it's not that impressive in Toulouse.
and
either.
it's not but it's small, but sections of it are totally intact. And what's interesting is if you visit the Roman parts of the Cluny, and then it's a 10-15 minute walk away, and you go there, you really get an idea of what was Roman Paris.
Right. That one, I would say, go for the neighborhood.
Yeah,
the neighborhood is
absolutely.
lovely. So
It's a great walk.
Yeah. Mémorial de la Shoah.
Yes.
There are two of them.
There are two of them.
I don't know what they're called specifically, but there's one that's behind Notre Dame.
That is the memorial of the deportation.
Okay. Because I've been to both, but I couldn't remember the
That's
names.
the difference. That's
Okay.
the one about deportation.
Right.
And then you have the one that is right in the heart of the Marais.
Right.
That is the memorial.
And both
Shoah.
are amazing. So the one with deportation right behind the Notre Dame. The one that just struck me is that there's a map of France in there with all the departments, which are still the same departments that we
Right.
have today, basically. And it shows how many Jews were deported from each of these departments. And you can see that some of these departments really fought against the Germans, and some didn't.
And
some gave
didn't.
in, some just oh yeah, you can have the Jews. We don't care.
Wow.
So it's really, really interesting. And the other one in the Marais is bigger.
And it has names.
It has all the names. It has
Like the one in DC.
Yeah, that one will make you cry.
Yeah.
It's really sobering, worth a visit, but a little bit difficult to take.
Okay, so why don't we end with Opera Garnier?
Opéra Garnier, yes.
So we don't end with a sad note, because there and this is not a complete list.
Oh no, we've
This
been
is
talking
not.
almost over an hour and a half.
Yes.
And we have scratched the surface.
We've done the major ones and most of the ones that most people would probably go to, but literally Paris has so many museums that it's unbelievable.
Yeah. And Opéra Garnier, which episode was it? Did you know? Did you write it down?
Opera Garnier is episode 127.
127.
And of course, that is like going to a small Versailles.
Yes.
It is magnificent.
Yes.
It is
You must
so
do it.
much fun to visit.
Even your first time in Paris, go.
Even your first time in Paris.
Go.
It's just gorgeous.
And you have to book a guided tour.
Yes.
The guy, I've had two different guides. There's a man he's a little bit not very approachable when you look at him, but he's very good. He knows his stuff. And there's a woman who does it a lot too, and she's funnier. Anyway, they're both very good.
They're both very good.
Yeah, and there's
then
probably others that
if by
I've
some
met.
chance you're there with us,
Yeah, and then Elyse will take you, and she's a fabulous
take you to
guide.
the opera
The
house.
idea today, and I hope you have gotten that, was to give you an overview so that you can decide which ones you would like to see. You know, this is not the definitive list. We're definitely not trying to take when you type online overview of Paris museums, you have all these lists.
Right.
The top 10, the very best, the this and the that, the secret museums in Paris. Listen, folks, none of these are secret.
No.
They would love to have your visit.
They would love to. and really, it is, obviously, it would take a very long time to visit all of these places.
No, yeah.
This is
But
not
pick-
all one time. This is not 2 times.
We have a listener who is just now going. She just arrived in Paris. This is our 30th visit to Paris.
Okay.
Hello
this
to
is,
you.
This is for her.
Yeah, this is for. There's a bunch of. Well, she's probably been to most of these.
Probably has.
But if you're that sort of person, then yes, you need to, dig deep into Paris museums.
And then again, we all know that we like certain places that we go back to all the time.
Right.
So, but Paris is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful museum place.
Yes. And I would say for people who don't like museums at all, for those, I would say go to at least the Orsay.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't even say that. I think that for people who don't like museums at all, to think about what it is you really are interested in. If you're interested in history, go to Les Invalides and see the tomb of Napoleon.
That's true. If you like guns, go there.
If you like ancient, the world that's ancient, go to the several wings of the Louvre, because that's where they have they have the Abyssinian tablets, the first writing cuneiform systems. I mean, there is literally, if you want chocolate, if you want writing, if you want African art, I mean, there is something for everybody.
Everyone in Paris.
Absolutely.
Elyse, I am impressed how many of these museums you have visited.
I'm impressed too. And I'm thinking about all the ones I haven't been to yet.
We looked at the list and there weren't very many that she hasn't seen.
I didn't even realize it, to be honest, But then again, I think...
You love museums.
I love museums and I love Paris. So there you are.
Oh, and one last thing on the museum pass. This is something I found out because I exchanged some emails with the people who run the museum pass. Technically, if you are a European citizen, kids under 18 don't pay to go into any of these museums. Maybe some of the very private ones would be different, but most museums in France, if you're under 18, you don't pay to go in. The rule is if you're a European citizen.
Yeah.
But when I wrote to them, I said, but what if you're American?
Right.
And they didn't write back saying, oh, we don't care. But they were like, so long as the adults have the museum pass, we'll let the kids go in with you. But they do want proof of your age. Because, if you're 17...
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But they also told me that... Because I said, well, but what if they're worried about losing their passport? And they said, well, a photocopy of their ID is good enough. Sure. So, this... If you want to get the museum pass and you're visiting with your kids, wherever it is that you go by the museum pass, which should be in one of these downtown museums.
Right.
So you go to either the crypt or the conciergerie or when the Cluny is open, that's where I go, but it's not open right now. But you go to one of these and you make that the place where you buy your museum pass.
Right.
And you show your kids and you say, my kids, do they pay? And I bet they will say no.
Probably.
Okay. So this is something that I think most people don't know, but don't order it online, because online they'll just sell you whatever.
That's right.
And French people really want children to go to museums without paying. It's part of how we think. It's really important. So thank you. Good. Yeah, it's good. Thank you so much, Elyse.
You are quite welcome, Annie.
Au revoir, everybody.
Au revoir.
Thank you, Jenolyn Dettenhauser, William Chardiello, and Erica Lur for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. And thank you to all the other patrons who support the show month after month. Thank you for giving back. Your support is much appreciated. To support the show on Patreon, go to patreon.com/join us. That's Patreon. And join us is no spaces or dashes. And thank you. Thank you also, Eddie Couvillon. That's a good French name, right? Okay, you probably say Eddie Couvillon, maybe Couvillon in English? I don't know. But thank you for your one-time donation. It is much appreciated. You can also do a PayPal one-time donation for the show. And to learn about different ways you can support the show, go to joinusinfrance.com/support. For the extra this week, I will send you a neat list of all the museums mentioned and organized by area, aka arrondissement. To subscribe to the extras, go on joinusinfrance.com and look for the green button that says subscribe. In the new version of the show, it'll be a green button, but it'll say extras. But anyway, that's not ready yet anyway, so... Spring is really coming to France this time, and you know how I know that? because yesterday I had my daily walk, and when I left, the sun was out. It was warm. The sky had a few big white clouds and just one dark one, just, for contrast. Yes. I took my rain jacket just in case. By the time I got back to my house, well, not quite to my house, but within a kilometer of my house, the sky had turned completely black and it started pouring down with rain. I mean, a downpour. It only rained for maybe 10 minutes and then we were back to, beautiful blue skies and white clouds. But I was drenched. So when you come to France in the spring and the fall, especially in the spring, it will just rain out of nowhere. It just happens. So bring a rain jacket. And we actually have an expression in French for that. It's called les giboulées d'avril. Les giboulées d'avril. But this year, they're happening in March. So spring is coming for sure. The best way to connect with me is via email, annie@joinusinfrance.com. Or if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, leave a message, 1-801-806-1015. You can also join the awesome Join Us in France closed group on Facebook, where lots of knowledgeable folks hang out and exchange France trip advice. I'm there too as much as I can. And please, when you ask to join, answer the questions because every now and then I try to be nice and I let somebody in who did not answer the questions and they're spammers. And I've had a few reports of spam posts, and I thank you to those of you who report those. That's helpful. But do answer the questions. It makes my life so much easier. Au revoir. Have a wonderful week of trip planning, and I'll talk to you next week. I'm not sure what the episode is going to be next week because I need to go back to Barcelona. My sister is running the Barcelona Marathon, and I'm going to go photograph her. You see, this is how it works in my family. I do the eating and the drinking, and she does the running. We're very good. No, I'm going to go photograph her because I really enjoy photography and women's sports in particular. Anyway, au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2017 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.